So may I then introduce the panelists for this session? There are four. The first one is Dr. Morena Mokgoana, who is the Chief Executive Officer of BioVac. And then the second one is Kadisi Ntambeleni, UCT Medical Molecular Scientist and Immunologist, followed by Dr. Jeffrey Mphahlele, who is the Vice President for Research at the South African Medical Research Council, and Dr. Kobus Herbst from the South African Population Research Infrastructure, popularly known as SAPRIN. Now, these scientists will be sharing with you their experience and expertise, and in the interest of time, please allow us not to read your bios, and I will just ask them to give their 5 minutes interventions each, followed by each other, one intervene in between, and then we'll just see whether there are emerging themes that are coming out of their interventions. If we do have a few minutes, we'll probably allow for one question maybe, because we are tight with time. We need to be done by 2, and then I will try and summarize. So may I then invite immediately Mpho Mokgoana to take the floor.
Thank you, Gigi, and thank you, Minister, for the opening remarks. My name is Morena Mokgoana. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of BioVac. The theme of this session is about journey of vaccines in South Africa. I'd like to maybe tilt a little bit more towards vaccine manufacturing capacity and the journey from what I've been told happened in the past, and some of the lessons learned that hopefully will not be repeated going forward. So I think, the Minister, we're very encouraged by the fact that there's a lot of effort coming from the Department of Science and Innovation in terms of giving impetus and having the support of the presidency as well in terms of really reviving the vaccine research and manufacturing landscape. For those of you that may not be aware, and I'm also told the story about vaccine manufacturing in South Africa. So many of you may not be aware that South Africa used to have quite large vaccine manufacturing capability that started in the 50s and the 60s, from what I'm led to believe. There were actually 3 entities that used to manufacture vaccines in South Africa. There were 2 in Johannesburg, at the campus where the National Health Laboratory Service is now. If any of you have been to Sandringham, in that large campus, they used to manufacture viral vaccines. They used to also manufacture bacterial vaccines. In Cape Town, there used to also be the State Vaccine Institute that also used to manufacture vaccine, and I believe that South Africa also contributed to smallpox eradication because some of those vaccines, particularly smallpox, was also manufactured in South Africa. Now, at the time, vaccine manufacturing was not a sexy business, if I can call it that. It was not actually it was mainly the functions of government. A lot of the state, manufacturing was being led by governments. So there were many vaccine manufacturing capabilities throughout the world, mainly led by governments. It was not at that time a commercially attractive enterprise. A few things happened, between then and now globally. I'll maybe start with a global landscape. Vaccines, and I'm sure I'm probably talking to the converted, is a tough business in terms of the many failures that you have in terms of the development work, and not only in clinical trials, but even before you get to clinical trials, there can be many failures before you get there. Examples are HIV vaccines and others, but you can also get failure in the clinical trial phase, but you can also get failure once the product is launched. And with that, you need to have a lot of tolerance, but you also need to have enough funding to be able to withstand the journey that you go along. So it became quite difficult for a lot of the state-owned enterprises to sustain that momentum, and a lot more privatization took place globally. In South Africa, with apartheid being in full force, there was also an element of self-sustainability. However, in the mid-80s and towards democracy, as the economy was not taking off well, there was minimal investment in the local vaccine manufacturing infrastructure. At that time, in the 80s, I remember the recombinant technology was starting to come off, and the local facilities were just not adapting to what was to become new technologies. So they slowly dwindled and died prior to democracy, and the last entity that was sort of hanging by the thread was the State Vaccine Institute that was based in Cape Town. And that is when BioVac was formed, we actually inherited that site. Now one may say, but you had rich vaccine manufacturing capability, so what happened? So unfortunately, the cessation of vaccine manufacturing capacity also meant that the cessation of, or the disappearance of skills that was there. If you're in the vaccine manufacturing game, you have to keep updated with what's happening. You have to invest, and unfortunately, a lot of that depth was left. I'm very happy that we are having these type of webinars now, because I think a lot of people are now tuned to listen to aspects about vaccines in general. I think there are aspects about manufacturing and how easy or difficult it is. I think people are looking at what's happening globally and say, well, a vaccine came up in a year, why can't South Africa do it? I think South Africa does have the capability, but I think we need to also recognize the foundation that was there relative to other companies and other countries that are there. So I think we need to be able to put our context into perspective, but I think the capability does exist in South Africa, and I'm hoping that this momentum will certainly build up. On the disease front, I maybe won't go too high on that, and maybe others like Professor Mphahlele maybe can go into it, but there's been great success even in South Africa as far as vaccine introduction is concerned, particularly on the expanded program on immunization. The vaccines that are being rolled out, that are being injected today in kids, have done tremendous work. We have pneumococcal conjugate vaccine that has been introduced for more than 10 years now. The disease burden in terms of pneumonia, childhood pneumonia, is minimized. Rotaviruses, there have been wards, diarrheal wards that have been closed because of the success of vaccines. So I think there's a lot more that maybe other speakers can go into. But I just wanted to say that South Africa does have the capability to revive vaccine manufacture. We're very happy to learn that the likes of CSR and others are really getting into this game. BioVac certainly has put up its hands, and we are doing a lot ourselves in terms of using the capability that we have at the moment. The capability that we will be utilizing is the pediatric vaccine infrastructure that has already been put up. The question is, how do we scale it, and how do we scale it to a point that we can manufacture our own active pharmaceutical ingredients, or what is commonly known as drug substance. But with a few minutes I have a DG, maybe I will pause here and then we'll take questions, I'm sure, through the chat or maybe later on. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mpho. May I just apologize to Dr. Tambeleni? I made a mistake. The program was amended a bit. We would like to ask first Dr. Owen Kalua from the World Health Organization to come before you. So my apologies. So may I then invite Dr. Owen Kalua to give his few remarks from the World Health Organization.
Thank you very much, Chair and colleagues and distinguished panelists. I had prepared a presentation, but I'm not too sure with the time whether I'll be able to go through most of it, but I'll try to be to go through it quite quickly, because I do realize the pressure of time. I hope you can see my presentation. Basically giving what I was requested to give was a perspective of WHO on the vaccine rollout in the African region. So the first slide which I have there, is basically just highlighting the fact that in all the regions in the world, we have experienced, except in Southeast Asia, a second wave. And that this second wave has been much higher than the first wave. and that in all these regions, we are seeing declines in terms of the new infections. And this slide here just quickly gives the extent of the variant, particularly looking at two variants here, the 501YV2, and the other one is the variant that originated first in the UK. And just to emphasize that, in fact, the variants have been demonstrated in a number of countries within Africa, particularly I'm talking here of Sub-Saharan Africa, which is the WHO Africa region. And this does not give us the full picture really, because we know there's limited capacity for genomic sequencing in a number of countries. But just to say that in South Africa here, both variants have been identified as well as in Ghana. So I just want to quickly to talk about the sources of vaccines in Africa, which mostly will be from three sources: the COVAX facility, which aims to procure and distribute vaccine to cover 20% of the population, the African Vaccine Acquisition Tax Team of the African Union, looking at 60% of the population, and of course, bilateral agreements between manufacturers and countries. And WHO has put in place what is known as the COVAX facility. And this is part of the ACT Accelerator, the vaccine arm of the ACT Accelerator, which aims at ensuring that there is availability and equitable distribution of vaccine, therapeutics, and diagnostics, along with strengthening the health systems in order to deal with COVID-19. And the goal of the COVAX is to deliver 2 billion doses by the end of the year and guarantee fair and equitable access of COVID vaccines for all that are participating. Just to say that the scope of the first allocation round for the COVAX are the doses, the area doses from Pfizer and AstraZeneca, and that is AstraZeneca from the Serum Institute of India as well. And then just quickly also to go to the next slide is just to show that about 15 countries in the Africa region highlighted in red there are the countries that are ready to receive the vaccine from the COVAX very soon. One of the key requirements are regulatory approval to be in place in the countries or to be imminent. They should be confirmed indemnity and liability agreement. There must be import authorization, and also those that have applied should receive a positive outcome following the regional review committee of the national vaccine rollout plan. So globally, the vaccines have been rolled out, and as of the 21st of February, 80% of these doses have been administered in 10 countries. And the campaigns have started in 87 economies, which are 55 high income, 18 upper middle income, 11 lower middle income, and 3 in low income countries. And if you look at this map here, you find in Africa, countries have hardly started. A bit in South Africa here with the Johnson & Johnson rollout, as we're aware of, and also Algeria and Morocco, but most of the rest of the rollout is happening in other countries. So this is the, as you know, the first rollout of vaccine in South Africa, looking at the various phases and the various priority groups, but also using the Johnson & Johnson vaccine as an implementation study. So the AstraZeneca forms one of the biggest component of the vaccines that are available to be used within the COVAX facility. But of course, this has been given the emergency use listing by WHO, but also the Strategic Advisory Group on Immunization had approved these particular vaccines. But their main recommendation I want just to highlight that WHO recommended the use of the AstraZeneca according to the prioritization roadmap even if variants are present in the country. But most importantly, that country should conduct benefit risk assessment according to the local epidemiological situation, which is what South Africa took into account in terms of having the 501v2 as the most predominant variant, and therefore having for now, having to pause the use of the AstraZeneca vaccine. But what I just wanted to highlight on this slide is that as we have seen that in all the regions globally, there's a decline in terms of new cases of COVID-19. And this is happening even in the face of low coverage in terms of vaccine rollout, which means that there's an important role, and this role will continue to be important throughout our fight against COVID, and that's the role of non-pharmaceutical interventions. And I like to believe that these interventions have also played a role in terms of the declines that we have observed within South Africa. And until population immunity is attained through widespread vaccination, the strict adherence to non-pharmaceutical interventions remains the safety net against resurgence driven by the new variants. And we need to continue to promote that. So in conclusion, I just want to say, Mr. Chair, that the emergence of new variants underscores the importance of sequencing and genomic surveillance. And this calls for more investment to scale up and sustain capacities for genomic surveillance in countries. And also that data information sharing is critical among its countries. And timely information and sharing is critical for adjustment of our response measures. And then the vaccines that will go forward will have to be adapted. Manufacturers need to modify the available vaccine to take into consideration the new circulating variant. And more importantly, to continue to work and research to get vaccine candidates that will be able to protect against a number of variants. So the availability of booster doses based on the new variants will increase the benefit from the vaccine. And also, finally, vaccine rollout. Scale up vaccination across the region will contribute to the prevention of resurgence. And in here, we have already seen how far the African region is lagging behind in terms of vaccine rollout. And one of the most important issues there is to do with vaccine availability, and most of the vaccine being bought upfront by the wealthier countries. So there's a lot of scope and need for local production of vaccines if we are going to scale up vaccination rapidly across the region in order to reach herd immunity early enough and contribute to prevention of resurgence of COVID-19. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dr. Owen Kalua, for a very, very well articulated presentation from the World Health Organization, but with a particular focus on what's happening in the rest of the continent. We really, really appreciate this overview of what's happening, but also the insights around this important element of sharing data, and as we find these variants, and the importance of ensuring that then the vaccines, as they get developed and they get rolled out, we are also able to deal with the new variants. And then lastly, the need for us to accelerate the rollout in our own continent. So thank you, thank you, thank you. So may I then again apologize, Dr. Ntambeleni, to have interfered. May I then hand over to you?
I have a bit of a presentation, but I'll try to move very fast, and I don't know whether the computer that I have is going to be able to do slide view. Can you check?
Yeah, we can see it.
Is it fine?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let me just move here. So because the talk of today, we're going to be talking about dispelling myths and of variants and vaccines. So I would like to start talking about what is a vaccine and how it works. So the first thing that I'll talk about, what is a vaccine? So a vaccine is like a sort of a medication that trains the body to fight the disease before the disease comes in. So in other words, it's either the virus, it's weakened, or the virus or the virus or the bacteria, it's weakened. It's either can be done by using nucleic acid and of its like the one for AstraZeneca, it uses the mRNA, which is a new technology. So what happens, the weakened virus or the part of the nucleic acid of the virus, it's injected to the body. And hello?
Yes, we can still hear you.
It's not moving from me. I don't know what happened here. Sorry. Okay, yeah. So the body is trained to produce antibodies to fight the pathogen. And when the real enemy, which is either a virus or a bacteria, the body has already know which mechanism and which antibodies to use. That's what they use of the vaccine, because the body has been trained to fight the pathogen before the real that causes the disease, the real part of the pathogen comes in. So further, there are different types of vaccines that are being rolled out in South Africa, and the effectiveness. Even the director said it from BioVac, what kind of those vaccines. So we have the BCG virus, which vaccine, which is the one that it's used for TB, the measles, the HPV, the OPV, the PCV vaccine. So these are some of the vaccines that are rolled out in South Africa. And vaccines is not something that's foreign to us as a South Africans. We inject our children vaccine most of the time. And I think it's one of the strong points we can use to make people to understand that even those vaccines that have been rolled out when the children are still young, it works similar way. So further, we need to talk about this group of, there are different, like the myth. Where's the myth coming from? So the myths are coming from like this 4 different group of people in the population. There's anti-vaxxers. So the anti-vaxxers are the ones that are like, don't believe in the vaccines. And they have different myths. They believe that this vaccine that has been produced, it's here to reduce the population. They believe there's a 5G in them, they're gonna be tracked. And there's this group called the vaccine hesitanters. Those ones, they're hesitant, but they ask right questions, but they are pulling more towards this vaccine, the fixed anti-vaxxers. And there's this other group, the vaccine accepting one, they're confused. They ask right questions. They are more similar to vaccine hesitants, and they are similar in a similar group. And there's this fixed pro-vaccines who are willing to take a vaccine because they understand how the vaccine works and how can protect us. So with this, we have a big task of combating this misinformation. How can we do that? So we have to first develop trust. The government and the experts needs to develop trust with the broader public. So with that, we can able to shift the scale towards the pro-vaccine group. But we need to answer important questions when people are asking. We need to educate people what are those in vaccine and what is the benefit of the vaccine. That's the most important thing. I feel like education is very important to now on fighting this misinformation. Again, the minister spoke about fake news. Fake news is taking over and people are starting to believe that this vaccine is here to depopulate. This vaccine is gonna make them not to have children. There's a lot of this fake news. How can we regulate this fake news? And how can we answer general public the valid questions they have and be informed about this vaccine that this vaccine is here to help, not to destroy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tabeleni. Sorry to give you the title. I will try not to summarize, and we are running about 15 minutes late. So I will then request Dr. Mpahlele, Professor Mpahlele, to come immediately.
Thank you very much, Program Director. And let me just say protocol, all protocol observed. So my presentation is about the vaccines. And I thought maybe I should just take a moment to share with you some of the scientific progress made with vaccine development. So we know that if there's anything that we need to really end the acute phase of the pandemic is vaccines. And vaccines will always remain the cornerstone of controlling infectious diseases. And you have heard from other speakers that vaccines have been very useful in the past to control many infectious diseases. So it's the same thing with COVID-19. Without a vaccine, obviously we will not be able to control this pandemic. So in terms of scientific progress, a lot has been done. And I must say that significant progress has already been made in developing vaccines against COVID-19. Unfortunately, the virus has proven to be a moving target. We are still learning a lot about the genetic evolution of the virus, immunity to the virus, and many other critical information about the virus, the natural history, epidemiological characteristics of the virus. So that said, obviously the current vaccines were developed with three principles, if I can put it that way. The first is the principle of speed, the second principle of scale, and the last one was the principle of equitable access. So we see that 13 months after the virus has emerged, we have got at least 73 diverse portfolio of candidates that are in clinical trials. And of this, we have got at least 5 vaccines that have been approved for emergency use. So it is very important to underline that at the moment, we don't have any vaccine that is licensed, but all the vaccines that are being used, they are used under emergency authorization. So we don't really have a perfect COVID-19 vaccine at the moment. However, we believe that the use of multiple vaccines that we have, and not just the use in limited number of countries. So we want to see widespread application of these vaccines in all countries. And if we can get to that stage, we will be able to end the acute phase of the pandemic. Obviously, it's very difficult to put a timeline to this because the timeline is dependent on the number of countries that will be using or that will have access to the vaccines. So with that background, is there anything that we can call an aspirational COVID-19 vaccine? Obviously, there are a number of characteristics one can describe which might fit an aspirational COVID-19 vaccine. The first and the most important characteristic is the safety and efficacy. Obviously, safety and efficacy are non-negotiable. Ideally, we need a vaccine that can be effective in a single dose. We know that so far, for those that are being used or clinical trialed, we know that Johnson & Johnson is given as a single dose. We know a vaccine that can give durable protection, enough to provide at least for several years, and ideally to protect for a lifetime. But we are not there yet because we're still learning about the virus. We don't know the extent and the duration of immunity that will be generated by the current vaccines. So we still don't know whether we might require the use of boosters along the way, but it looks like it's most likely that we might have to use the boosters. We don't know whether the current vaccines will protect against several variants that are circulating globally, and not just our local variant. So it might be that an ideal vaccine will use different antigens and variants, and we should know the clinical efficacy of these vaccines before widespread use in the population, of course. In terms of the safety, very, very important that a vaccine should have minimal side effects. Fortunately, all the vaccines that are under emergency use, they've got acceptable safety profile. So this is not an area that we really need to worry about, although I must emphasize that data on safety is an ongoing process because the safety of vaccines, whether we're talking about registered vaccines, licensed vaccines, you have to continue to collect the data post-licensure. So with COVID-19 vaccines being really new vaccines, obviously this is non-negotiable. That as the vaccines are being used under emergency use, we have to collect the safety data. Even when the vaccines attain full licensure, we have to continue collecting safety data. There is still a lot that we don't know about interchangeability of the vaccine brands within and across vaccine platforms. You know that we have got at least 6 platforms that are being used to develop COVID-19 vaccines. But at the moment, obviously, we don't know whether we can use, for example, Pfizer for priming and AstraZeneca for boosting. So research is still undergoing to try and understand, whether we can use these vaccines in that way. And obviously, this is posing a serious challenge to herd immunity, because we all talk about achieving herd immunity, but if we are not clear about the duration of immunity, if we are not clear whether the vaccines can protect against several variants, obviously herd immunity is at stake. And we hope that the use of multiple vaccines will help us to achieve that. But I just want to point out that this remains a challenge. The other thing that we need to be aware of is really the ease of using the vaccines. So we need a vaccine that is easier to handle and deliver. Ideally, we need a vaccine that can be administered in a simple way without the need for diluents or reconstitution. The vaccine that can be co-administered with other vaccines. For example, we're getting into the flu season in South Africa. If we are administering COVID-19 vaccines, if it has been tested that it can be safely and effectively administered along with the influenza vaccine, that will be a bonus. So for now, obviously, if you get a COVID-19 vaccine, you will have to wait for a certain period before you get other vaccines. We need a vaccine that can address the specific needs of a diverse range of populations and settings. Just to give an example, the current vaccines haven't been tested in children. So they cannot be given to children. And we know that they've been tested in those with underlying medical conditions like hypertension, diabetes, respiratory diseases, people with who are immunocompromised like HIV infection, or having chronic infections like hepatitis B and hepatitis C. But not all vaccines have shown efficacy in all these special populations. So we still need the vaccines that can show efficacy and safety in all these subpopulations. And then we also need a vaccine that is affordable, because a vaccine that is expensive may not be able to be used by low-income countries. So these are some of the characteristics that I would say are ideal for an aspirational COVID-19 vaccine. So clearly the vaccines that we have at the moment, not all of them, and in fact, none of them can meet all these criteria. So what this means is that we still need to continue the search for aspirational COVID-19 vaccine. Maybe we may not be able to get there, but I know that manufacturers have already started the research on the next generation vaccines, which will be able to address some of these challenges. And I will probably stop here, unless you give me a minute or so, just to say that for the next generation of vaccines, we really need to see the vaccine that will be ideal for use in low resource settings, especially if you look at the logistical challenges that are faced by low resource settings countries. So stability, especially temperature stability, is very, very important over and above the scientific issues that I've mentioned. The ability of the vaccine to be manufactured to scale, as indicated by Dr. Makwana, is also important. And because if we can do this, we can reduce the cost of the vaccines. So I think I will stop here, Program Director, and I will be happy to take some questions.
Thanks very much, Dr. Mkhahlele, for reminding us about the roles of vaccine in protecting us and how to administer, especially emphasizing the issue of the safety of vaccines, and then, of course, the affordability. So may I then invite Dr. Kobus Hest from SAPRIN to address us. Thank you.
Honorable Minister, DG, ladies and gentlemen, with availability of vaccines, we are now at a point where we are adding a very powerful weapon to the arsenal of measures the nation has taken to combat COVID-19. Widespread uptake of the available COVID-19 vaccines will allow a more rapid and safer reopening of the nation. Since last year, SAPRIN has been following a random sample of more than 2,000 households in 3 nodes in Mpumalanga, Limpopo, and KwaZulu-Natal, interviewing them every 2 to 3 weeks. We documented the impact of non-pharmaceutical measures against the pandemic on the knowledge, behavior, and outcomes for these households. This work has some consistent patterns, including that knowledge about COVID-19 have increased steadily. The use of face masks increased and remained high. Reporting of lost household earnings declined, and levels of anxiety amongst individuals declined as well. As the vaccine rollout progresses through its various phases, it will be just as important to continuously measure vaccine-related attitudes, behaviors, and impacts, including vaccine hesitancy, vaccine uptake and target groups, and the effectiveness of the vaccine rollout in preventing infection and illness. This year, SAPRIN is therefore gearing its notes to provide key information to decision makers and scientists as we follow the vaccine rollout in South Africa. Because of its long experience of working across rural and peri-urban communities and its extension to now include urban population, SAPRIN is uniquely placed to measure in detail the reach and effectiveness of the vaccine rollout in resource-limited settings, something vital to minimizing inequalities in health access. Specifically, we are implementing the following data collection procedures in 4 existing nodes across the country. We have added questions on willingness to accept the COVID-19 vaccine and the reasons for this decision. We will repeat these questions over time to measure changes and predictors of hesitancy over time. As the vaccine rollout progresses to the community level, we plan to link our existing detailed population databases to the vaccine register. This will allow us to determine progress in access to vaccination, particularly for vulnerable groups such as those in remote areas, the elderly, and those with pre-existing health conditions. SAPRIN has experience over a long period in measuring the level of diseases such as HIV, TB, hypertension, and diabetes in our communities. We will use this experience to measure exposure to COVID-19 disease and antibody levels induced by vaccination and infection on an ongoing basis. We will assess how such factors affect the proportion of the population that must be vaccinated for South Africa to achieve herd immunity. In collaboration with the Network for Genomic Surveillance in South Africa, we will also be able to investigate cases of COVID-19 that might occur in persons we know had antibodies against SARS-CoV-2 or received COVID vaccination previously and characterize the associated virus and immune response. Because SAPRIN is supported by the Department of Science and Innovation as a long-term research infrastructure, we will also be able to look at the long-term health outcomes, including mortality and any long-term consequences of the COVID-19 infection. SAPRIN is looking forward to support the road to success with vaccines. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Cobus, for this wonderful work, support that SAPRIN brings to the work of understanding what's happening at society level, especially in the rural setting. We greatly appreciate the support.